Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this rather special event at the Lockdown LitFest. We hope you're well, we hope you're keeping safe, and we hope that you're being careful as lockdown is being gently released. As you know, we're aiming to bring you a wide and diverse selection of authors from around the world who write in different languages, who write from different perspectives. And it's my great pleasure to be able to introduce you today to Jessica Jarlvi. Born in Sweden, Jessica moved to London at the age of 18 to obtain a BSc Honours degree in publishing and business. She then worked in publishing in the UK for a number of years before moving to Chicago, where she edited a magazine for expats. Back in Sweden, she then completed a master's in creative writing, and since 2010, Jessica has taught journalism and media at a local university and spent the last 5 years as the marketing and PR manager for a British firm. A couple of years ago, she was one of the winners of the Monte Grappa Prize for First Fiction at the Emirates Airline Festival of Literature in Dubai. Still living in Sweden, but now actually talking to us from Dubai, I'm delighted to say that her first two novels, When I Wake Up, published in 2017, and What Did I Do, published in 2018, have gone on to be hugely regarded by all sorts of people, not least Sophie Hannah, who has written of Jessica's work. Jessica Jarlvi is a hugely talented writer and definitely one to watch. Another correspondent has written a breathtaking, heart-pounding, dark debut, sure to delight fans of The Girl on the Train and Before I Go to Sleep. Jessica Jarlvi, a very warm welcome to the Lockdown LitFest.
Thank you so much for having me, Paul.
I've said you're in Sweden. Of course, I'm completely wrong. You're in Dubai, aren't you?
Yeah.
And how is life in Dubai?
Very hot. We had 48 degrees yesterday.
That's pretty hot. And you're keeping safe and you're keeping well?
Absolutely, yes.
What I'd like to do is, if I may, is to talk to you about the inspirations for your writing and your career to date, because it strikes me that the trajectory of your career will give hope to a lot of want-to-be authors and a lot of debut authors. So I'm going to use you as kindly as I hope I'm able to do as a test case, because it's a very interesting career path that has led you to publication.
Yes, absolutely.
I understand that you wrote a lot before we even saw you publish, but you wrote it specifically in Swedish. What
Correct.
were you writing, and where did the will to write come from?
Well, I think I've always been interested in writing and reading. I spent all my days in the library growing up. It was my escape always. And so I was always writing, but not really considering whether I could make it into a career. But I did write some fiction in Swedish, which I did try to get published. But I had been living in the UK for some time, and I got the feedback that my Swedish, was quite influenced by English. And also, it's a very different process there because you don't have an agent as such. You approach the publisher directly. So I would be told, we love this book, don't rewrite it, but we don't know how to sell it. And that was very frustrating when you have completed a novel. And so I still kind of kept going with it. Until my husband, who is British, suggested that why don't I write something that he could actually read? And I thought, yes, what a good idea. He'd actually Google translated a few texts and was intrigued, luckily. And so I did. I started writing When I Wake Up, submitted the first 3 chapters to a competition, the Monte Grappa First Fiction competition, ran out of the Emirates Airline Festival of Literature. And I was picked one of the winners and haven't looked back since.
So you are now known for writing rather dark, absolutely gripping, page-turning psychological thrillers in English. Is that what you were writing in Swedish, or did you actually change the focus of your writing ambitions?
I think I was writing more literary fiction. It was definitely dark as well. It seems to be that our Swedish writers, veer to the darkness, even though I'm actually strangely a very positive and happy person. But yes, it was more literary. It was perhaps a bit deeper. The two main characters in When I Wake Up, I had actually written a sort of novel with the two of them, but it was more a relationship novel without the suspense. And so when I started writing a novel in English, I wanted to use those characters because they were still playing in my mind and I couldn't kind of leave them alone. But I decided to create a different setting in which their relationship thrived.
I'm very intrigued by that because we had Jonas Hassan Khemeri on this show on the festival some weeks ago, whose latest book, The Family Clause, is a fantastic dissection of family relationships. You say about the relationship between the two characters, I assume you mean Anna and Eric in When I Wake Up, yes?
No, I'm actually meeting with the two women, Iris and Anna.
Right, okay.
Yeah. Eric was still in the sort of the novel that I wrote, but didn't quite play such a big part.
Well, given that you said you had a love of going to the library when you were younger and when you were learning to write, libraries appear greatly in When I Wake Up. What do they represent to you?
Well, this particular library is actually based on the library that I used to go to, which sadly has closed down. But it was just a form of escape, I think, struggling sometimes to feel like I fit in, perhaps. You would always find a book where you could fit in. And it was also living in a very small town growing up. It was a way to explore the rest of the world and other people. I've always been very intrigued by books that feature women who are not like me and who have a different experience to me. I think that's why I've been living abroad for half my life, because I have that need to experience new things constantly.
You have a very good fundamental understanding, and I'm obviously self-evidently a male reader, for the female dynamic, and specifically the Swedish female dynamic. Can I take you back to your childhood? You say you grew up in a small town. Can you tell us what the young Jessica Jarlvi was like? I assume you were an avid reader.
Definitely, yes. I was a very avid reader. I was one of those girls who was always, my back was always very tanned because I was always lying on my stomach reading wherever I went, whether it was on holiday or at home, because my mother was always trying to get me to go outside because all I really wanted was to stay inside and read. I was quite nerdy, I'd say, quite studious. I was determined to have good grades so that I could go out into the world and do something different, which is what I ended up doing. But I have a great love of Sweden, and especially the small town that I come from.
We'll come to When I Wake Up in a minute. Let's take through the path to publication, because I said you read for a degree in publishing and business, so obviously the will was there to begin with. You then did a master's in creative writing. Where did you do that?
I did that in Sweden, actually. I applied to a UK university and was accepted to both. But I decided that because I was temporarily living in Sweden, because I just had my second child, I decided to do it there, even though I hadn't. I'd been living in the UK for 10 years and all my working life had been in English. But I thought it would be a nice challenge, actually. And also, more than anything, I wanted to meet like-minded people in person rather than do it online. So that's why I decided to do it there. And it was a great experience, very much focused on the art of writing, perhaps, rather than how to sell your writing. I did a course further down the line with Curtis Brown that was perhaps more useful in that sense on how to get published. But I definitely don't regret my creative writing masters, because more than anything, what it did was it made me take my writing seriously. It made me think of myself as an author and that I could actually do this. And that was very important.
I'm delighted to hear you say that, because, of course, there's been a huge explosion in creative writing courses from the Faber Academy, obviously from the University of East Anglia, the one set up by Malcolm Bradbury, the one of the original MA courses in creative writing. For those who who have a story to tell, for those who have the will to write but are thinking about the expense, because generally these are quite high-ticket items, what do you think these courses do for you? What signs of hope, what hope can you give to people who are thinking, I quite like to get to the next stage, I quite like to maximize my chances of writing better, of getting published? What do you think it gave you, and how would you recommend them to other people?
I would definitely recommend that you do one rather than sitting on your own writing, because the experience of sharing your writing with others and receiving their constructive feedback as well as delivering feedback is very beneficial. And you will get that on either whether you do the Faber Academy, Curtis Brown, or you do a master's, you'll have that experience. I think for me, the experience of doing the master's was that it was more experimenting with different genres, looking at different ways of writing, looking at, for example, we did Hemingway. We looked at Hemingway and we had to read a chapter and then we had to write a second chapter in the same style, which was really interesting to see how a different writer would write it, because it's also how you find your own voice, is exploring other writers. I think people sometimes are worried about copying other writers, but actually by doing that in your own time is how you find your own unique voice. Which is the one that you're going to use to get published. I think in terms of if you're at the stage where you are feel ready to get published, the Curtis Brown course, for example, is hugely beneficial, because at the end you'll have agents reviewing your work. And also you have input from agents, you'll have a Q&A, you'll get to ask those questions, and you'll actually understand the whole process. I'd already studied publishing, so for me, I already understood the process of it. But if I had gone into the masters not being aware of that, I think I would have been a little bit lost.
I'm intrigued to hear you channeling Hemingway. How did that go? Was that an enjoyable experience?
It was actually very enjoyable. Yeah. Yes.
What did you learn from Hemingway?
Well, I think it was just, one of the actually key things that we used to talk about was how he used to lock himself into a room with a bag of rice and then write until it was finished. It definitely does not resemble my way of writing at all. It's quite the opposite, actually, because I have 4 children and it's just chaos trying to fit in writing. Although, it does sound wonderful in some respects. But in terms of his type of writing, obviously it's incredible, but it's not my style of writing. And I think for most people, it's not. It's, but looking at those writers is how you get there and find your own way. And you don't have to write like one of the best writers to be successful, because you just got to write like you.
I know that one of Hemingway's great tips was, when you're finishing your day's writing, never end on a full stop. Leave it on an unfinished sentence, and then you've got somewhere easy to start the next day.
That is very good advice.
And his other lesson was, people say it's 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. Hemingway's version of that was his 100% application of bottom to seat. Just keep getting down, keep writing. You mentioned the word genre, which in your case is a critical word.
Mm-hmm.
So here in the UK, that thrillers, psychological thrillers, detective, process, and sort of police procedurals, rather, is a very, very busy marketplace in the publishing industry. So when you decided to write dark psychological thrillers, you must have known you were entering a fiercely competitive field. How conscious was that decision in terms of commercial viability and the balance of that just being what you wanted to write?
Right. So I think when you have been trying to get published for a while, you definitely have to start thinking about commercial viability. And obviously, as a reader as well, having some form of suspense. Having said that, though, I think even if you write literary fiction, there is a level of suspense. I think Toni Morrison, for example, she's an absolute expert at that. She creates a really deep, heavy piece of work, but it's you're constantly moving forward. You constantly want to move, turn the page. So I don't think you necessarily do one without the other. However, did I consciously think I'm going to write a psychological thriller? No, not really. I was very focused in When I Wake Up on the relationship in the novel. I was focused on the decisions that these women were making and how it would affect them as well as the people around them, the internal as well as the external conflict. But obviously, setting it in a sort of the initial scene, obviously where she's been assaulted. I thought that is quite a good starting point because it raises a lot of questions, obviously, for the reader, and hopefully that will keep the reader turning the page and wanting to read more. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it certainly does. Let's talk about When I Wake Up. So Anna, a much-loved teacher, mother of 2, is beaten, left in a coma. A police investigation is launched, and news of the attack sends shockwaves through this, well, not only through her family, but also the very small Swedish community that she lives in. Her husband, father of her children, is Eric. His mother is stepping into the breach to sort of help with childcare and so on. Eric is very unhappy with how the police investigation is going. And what you do very neatly with this is it's sort of a time slip novel in that we have 2 stories running in tandem. Obviously, you know this, but I'll explain for the audience. One is what's happened after the attack, and one is what was happening leading up to the attack, which is where this fantastic female relationship between Anna and Iris, who is a librarian, comes to bear. Is that a fair summation of the setup for the book?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
I tell you what, would you mind giving our readers a real treat? It just suddenly struck me the best way to illustrate how spare and sparse and lean and captivating your writing is perhaps if you could do a reading for us. Would you mind?
Yes, of course, absolutely. I'll read the beginning. That's all right.
Thank you very much, Jessica.
Okay. All right. So this is from the husband's perspective, Eric. Teacher of the year, brutally attacked in school parking lot. Life-threatening injuries. Coma. No eyewitnesses. Eric tries to make sense of the words in the newspaper. They read like badly written lyrics. He's holding Anna's bruised hand. Her fingernails are raw and scraped for evidence. He feels sick. Emptied of emotion, he stares at his wife. He stares at the white walls. Then a rainbow of colours. Her wedding ring catches the sunlight, cascading beams of light across the dull room, and he's reminded of the beginning, 7 years earlier, when he sold a collection of records to pay for the diamond. The calm, grounded, and responsible nature made him feel loved. He needs to hang on to that feeling. The beginning, not the end, not even the in-between, when life rushed past and he sometimes struggled to remember why they were married. There was still cash in her purse, the police say. Money isn't a likely motive. Of course not, Eric says. We live a modest life. He's not sure if this adds value, even if it's true. They live in a small white brick house from the 60s and share a second-hand Volvo V70. They bought the station wagon when they left Stockholm for the southern countryside with its widespread yellow colza fields. Anna had just accepted a job at a local school. He was between assignments and followed her lead. That's when her career started to dictate their lives. The students became her life, and he was left to create his own. The words rape kit bounce harshly against the sterile walls. He switches off, stares at Anna instead, trying to read her. Why did this happen to us? Her body is heavy on the white bedding, the long dark hair arranged in a neat ponytail. He feels an urge to pull it out, to make it messy. They made her look different. If he squints, she could be someone else. Half her face is dark red, almost purple. Her right eye swollen, reflecting the attacker's anger. His insides tighten. Their head injuries are consistent with the damage on the car door. So it could have been an accident. Not likely. The ribs are bruised, the right arm broken, the head, it hasn't just hit the car door once. Sorry, we understand you need time. For what, he says. To cope, to grieve, to hope. What is it that they want from him? He looks around the room, bewildered. There's no one there to respond to, just Anna. They've left him alone. The respirator next to her bed dominates, its overwhelming sound filling the room, reminding him that her chest is no longer rising on its own. Oxygen flows through her mask, as if she's in the sea, deep underwater. They did a dive test on their honeymoon in the Maldives. She wanted to become a certified diver, but then the twins were born. He imagines the machine next to her bed as a gas cylinder and the tube a diving regulator. Her head could be filled with the colors of the ocean. In her dreamlike state, she might be happy. Tears form in the corners of his eyes, one by one, blurring. The doctors haven't told him much. Or maybe he didn't listen properly. He finds the whole hospital machine intimidating. The overwhelming smell of disinfectant, the physicians in the unbuttoned, sloppy white coats, the nurses annoyingly officious. There is this unspoken requirement of him to behave a certain way. He has no idea how to conduct himself. This is not something you can prepare for. He is immature. Anna has always said so, and she's been right. When they first started dating, she found his juvenile nature endearing. You can get away with anything, she would laugh, although her patience seemed to diminish as time went on. He blames her bloody job. Being a teacher is a calling for her. She is consumed by her students, people she isn't even related to. Now he must nod and say, yes, she was a great teacher, even though he secretly thinks she should have been a better mum than she would have been at home.
Beautifully read, Jessica, and a fantastic example of your writing. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Can we start to tease it apart just a little bit?
Sure.
There is, of course, great controversies, I'm sure you're aware, that in any thrillers, detective novels, police procedurals, the victim is generally a woman. There's a female writer. Is this something that you thought about? Too often we see women being the victims and not men.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And I know that there are various voices out there saying that you shouldn't depict women as a victim. However, the reality is that women often are a victim. And so I do think it's very important to highlight that. And for me, writing this character as a woman, it was easier to connect with. And that is simply why she is a woman.
You know, it's the best description, the best defense, not the defense is needed I've ever heard. That's fantastic. Can we talk about, there's something you are very good at. And for some audiences around the world, this may be a slightly ticklish subject, but you're very good on the writing of sex and intimacy in your work, which is, of course, as I know you've said, it's a big part of everybody's lives. It's where we all spring from. A lot of authors sort of shy away from it. There used to be a thing in films that, the camera goes up to the bedroom door and goes no further. You go quite a lot further than that. I assume that's a conscious decision and that you have your reasons for doing so.
Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, like you say, I think intimacy and sex is part of life. And I find it quite interesting that that it's still so controversial to write about it, because in books, we are so close to the characters. So why should we turn away when it comes to their sex life? I don't really understand that. I think it's quite telling about a character, how they behave sexually, how they can discuss it, how they can communicate around sex. And obviously, in this book, you have a heterosexual woman falling in love or falling for a bisexual woman. And I felt like not having sex would be very difficult in this book. I'm not saying that all my books would have this amount of sex in them, but I felt it was very, very relevant for this novel to show the emotional and physical journey that she is on, and how it impacts everything else in her life. But yes, I just find it interesting because we can go into serial killers' mind and read their thoughts, and we don't shy away from that. But somehow, when it comes to sex, people are quite often having a reaction to that. And I find it quite intriguing because sometimes I can understand where sometimes an author might just add a sex scene because just to spice it up. That's not going to work. It needs to be part of the story. But also, it is very, very telling the way that the character approaches the other person. Says a lot about them. So I would even argue that it's show as opposed to tell. When you include a sex scene. But again, you don't do it just for the sake of it. It needs to serve a purpose, just like everything else in a book needs to serve a purpose.
I'm sure you're aware of this, but Oberon Waugh set up the Bad Sex in Fiction Awards here in the UK, not to celebrate bad sex written in fiction, but to act as a warning to authors to say, don't be under pressure from your publisher to inject a spurious sex scene into an otherwise non-sexy novel just to spice things up, as you've just said.
Absolutely.
What I'm very intrigued about is how that conversation then went with your agent and with your publisher, British agent, British publisher, about whether you had to defend your decisions or whether they got on board, whether they understood what you were trying to do from the get-go.
Yes. So my agent, Luigi Bonomi, he was on board. There were no issues. He was very supportive. My publisher's also very supportive. I think my editor wanted me to scale back a tiny bit, which I did. Believe it or not, it was scaled back a tiny bit. But no, overall, I think they were very, very understanding of what it was contributing to the story.
Well, given that you're something of a masterclass and a teacher yourself, what would you say to writers out there who are addressing a sex scene? How do you write good sex?
I think you practice. You practice writing it as opposed to doing it. Yeah, no, but I think you need to think about how you communicate about sex yourself. Because if you are going to struggle to communicate with other people about sex, you are going to struggle to write about it. So be authentic. If you have any issues communicating about it, work out what those issues are. Once you feel comfortable talking about it, you're going to be comfortable writing about it.
No, it's a fantastic idea. This was a hugely successful novel. It reached a really good readers, really took to you, and
Yes.
are very loyal. I'm guessing there was pressure for a second novel. We'll come to the second novel in a minute. But having got published so well, what was it like? Was there a sense of coming home, given the journey that you've talked to us about, that you always knew you were going to be a writer, you wanted to be a writer? How did it feel to be published, to hold the book in your hand, and to know that there were people out there reading it and writing such stellar reviews?
Well, you just take it in and you enjoy it, I guess, and you feel like it was worth the hard work. I think for published authors, they don't often talk about the journey leading them up to it. We talk about overnight successes in many different industries, but actually, I don't think there is such a thing. I think everybody has worked very hard at their craft in one way or another. Whether you have your first book published or not, even if you have your first book published, I'm sure that you have been writing other fiction that you haven't shown to anybody. So yeah, no, you just enjoy it. But I would say that having worked so hard to make it, maybe you enjoy it a little bit more, maybe.
So having written When I Wake Up, what did you learn from writing When I Wake Up that you then applied to the second novel?
Well, I really enjoyed having different perspectives in the novel. I liked having the different points of view. It was quite a lot to have 5 different points of view in my first novel, so I tried to scale that back, but I think I still only got that down to 4 perspectives in the second one. It was just the time pressure of writing the second one was really full on. I didn't have a lot of time to write it. I was also pregnant, and I was still working my marketing job. So it was really, really hectic writing it. But also made me realize that when you really force yourself to create something, you also can.
Yes, exactly.
So you surprise yourself.
And the second novel is called Did I Do? So this next question is for really both the novels, because I think there's something quite extraordinary that you do. You seem to really inhabit your characters. And when you just said about writing the first novel in from the perspective of 5 different characters, and then the second novel about 4 different characters, I'm guessing that you are inhabiting each of those characters. You have to get their voice right. You have to know what drives them, what their motivations are, what their backgrounds are. Is that how it works? There's something sort of filmically actorial about how you write your characters. Is that conscious? Is that how you work?
I would say it probably is how I work, but whether it's conscious or not, I'm not quite sure. I think it just is the way that I do it. There was a time in life when I wanted to be an actress,
Right.
but this wasn't to be. I realized I didn't want it 200%, but what I wanted was to be a writer.
Well, what I'm talking about is the authenticity of characters. So how do you hang on to that? How do you create it, and how do you then manage it and maintain it?
Well, I think it is very much like acting, is that you just have to step into somebody else's shoes. I think what is interesting, though, is that as an actor, you are told to step into someone else's shoes and be that person. As a writer, we are often told to write what you know, which I hugely disagree with. Because if you did that, it would be very hard to go into 5 different characters and do that convincingly. So you have to be able to put yourself into somebody else, think their thoughts, just whether you write everything down about that character. I know some writers will write down, their background or whatever. I don't tend to do that when I start writing it. I have a vague idea and they kind of develop over time. I'm not a planner, so everything happens very organically. And even with the characters, even in When I Wake Up, I started writing it. There were 3 main characters. There was Eric and Anna, the couple who are married, and then Iris, who she meets in the book. But then I felt like Iris's husband, he had a lot to contribute and he had a lot to say. And I felt like I wanted the reader to see it from his point of view as well, to give him a voice. But sometimes what I do is I will start writing it from that point of view and realize that actually they don't have enough to contribute, and then I will scrap their point of view. But when I do feel like they are adding something, whether it's a lot or whether it's just, it just needs to be enough, really, to add to the story, then I'll keep them. Just like Anna's student, I feel like that really shows her character in her profession as a teacher. I felt that was important. So that's how I kind of build it up. And then obviously as the book grows, they all also grow in importance and they play a bigger part in the story.
Yes, I have to say it starts with sort of quite small roots and expands out and up very nicely. And Ilis's husband is foreshadowed rather nicely. On stepping into shoes, by the way, I went many years ago, I did an interview with Peter Falk, the actor who played Columbo. And we were talking about characters and so on. And he said the way that he's always done it in acting, he's sadly now dead, we miss him. He would go to charity shops and try on hundreds of pairs of shoes until he found exactly the pair of shoes he thought the character would wear that made him walk the way the character would walk. And that's sort of how he developed Columbo, from the shoes up, from a pair of charity shop shoes is what I'm trying to say.
I love that.
It's the analogy walking in your shoes really, really works. The first novel is set in a region of Sweden called Skåne, which will be very well known to anybody who's ever read anything by Henning Mankell for his Kurt Wallander series, or who's seen any of the TV series. Do you have the spectre of Wallander as a Swedish crime writer, as a Swedish psychological thriller writer? You are, of course, aware that people think, Swedish, Scandi noir, and anything from Henning Mankell to any of the other fantastic authors that are coming out of that region. How does that work? Because that, I would imagine, that's quite a responsibility to live up to, perhaps.
I don't really think of it that way. I think that I'm proud to be a Swedish author and I'm proud to be in their company, and I just try and create, it from my viewpoint, really. So, yeah, I think it would be easy to be intimidated by existing authors. But at the end of the day, you've got to be brave and you've got to do your own thing. And at the end of the day, it's going to be your name on a book and it's going to be you. authentically.
Exactly. Well, that's very true of your work. Can we talk a little bit about collaboration as well? Because of course, most people think, who are starting out as debut novelists, they think I'm just going to sit down and I'm going to write, and I send off to someone, and of course, it doesn't work like that.
Mm.
How do you work with your agent? How do you work with your publisher? Do you enjoy the level of collaboration that commercial writing requires?
Yes, I really do. And I really value their input. And I think when I was editing my first novel, I wasn't quite sure, when somebody wanted to change something, do I then have to change it? I remember having this discussion with somebody who's both an author and an editor. What do I do? And she said to me, you take their advice if you feel it's right. At the end of the day, it's your book. And it's going to be, like I said before, it's going to be your name on the cover. And so don't change it in a way that you're not comfortable with. And I thought that was really great advice, actually, because it is hugely beneficial to have other people cast an eye on it. There might be things that you haven't thought of, or maybe things that you think are clear, but you haven't made them clear enough. So I do think that my editor was saying to me about adding a lot of more like scenery, because for me, obviously, having grown up in this environment, I don't necessarily think there's anything spectacular about it. But she said, add more about this. I felt like, okay, was worried they're going to have a lot of fika, you know what fika is, been to Sweden, drink a lot of coffee and have cakes. But at the same time, I could also see the value for a reader who hasn't been to Sweden of adding it. So I thought that was really useful advice. But yes, there's nothing that we have disagreed on. I feel like they have really respected me as an author. And it's been a really, really great collaboration.
The sense of place is very important, I think, to both your novels, because they would be very different if they were set elsewhere. How much is the landscape a character in what you write?
I think it definitely is. It is a character because although I would say the scenery is probably very similar in many ways to, say, the UK, a small town in the UK, obviously there are little nuances, differences, and it's really about going back into that environment. For me, who hasn't now lived there for a while, it's actually easier to write about it than when I was living there. Just like, I'm sure that I will write a book that takes place in the UK, but I don't think I would have been able to do it while I was living there. It's easier when you take a step back and you view it differently. And also you need a bit of distance, I think. Not just actually physically being far away, but also time-wise. I think you need time away from a place before you can reflect on it.
There was a lovely line that made me realize that you don't shy away from sort of gender politics in this, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't have the copy of the book. I was reading from a PDF and I don't have it with me. But there's a line quite early on, somewhere in the first third of the book, where Anna is saying about childcare and work and balancing work-life balance and the responsibilities of being an employee and being a mother. And the point is made, I think it's by Anna, forgive me if I've got it wrong, where she says, if I leave work early to go and pick up the children, I'm a bad employee. If Eric leaves work early to go and pick up the children, he's a good father. It's just not fair. That, I assume, was you consciously felt that. Absolutely.
Now, that is conscious, but it's also what I felt like she would think as well. It's not, I might have my own ideas. I'm not necessarily going to insert into the book for the sake of it, but I very strongly felt like that is something that Anna really would think about, and that's what she would feel. And I really wanted that to be heard, because I think it is true.
As the number of books you write grows, as you gain more readers, as you gain more traction, and you're doing fantastically well, as we know, how does the responsibility you feel towards your readers work with you? I mean, it's a joy to know people are going to read you. Of course, that's what every writer wants. But of course, when you start to hit superstar status, which obviously you're on track for, you then have millions of readers, and they're going to be looking out for every twist, every turn. How does that work in your own mind in terms of planning your next work?
Yes, no, there's definitely a bit of pressure, for sure. It's feeling that you have to kind of keep writing in the same genre, perhaps, so that readers pick up your book and they expect the same. And I think as a creator, you also want to challenge yourself. You want to do something different. And I think that's where I'm at the moment, where I'm kind of at a crossroads. So I'm actually playing around with two projects, one which is similar to what I've written in the past, and one that is quite different. And I'm sort of, playing with both simultaneously, because I think just creatively, I do need to challenge myself and do something different. If that makes sense.
No, it makes very good sense. I may be reading too much into this. one of the things, if you're writing psychological thrillers, if you're writing police procedural, if you're writing stuff like this, I can imagine your publisher will say is, have you thought about writing a series focused on a central character? And if you haven't been asked that question, may I ask it of you now?
You know what?
Because I kind of like to read that from you.
A lot of friends actually suggest that. I think that commercially, they think that would be a great idea. I don't know. It does not appeal to me right now, but I should never say never. But I worry that I would get bored with a character and also having to come up with a story around the same character. It's quite nice when you finish a book that those characters are always going to be with you, but it's also quite nice to put a book on the bookshelf and then move on to something else, which is how I am in life as well. I think I want to explore as much as possible, learn as much as possible,
but keep moving on.
Yes, exactly.
So you're
being
not going to
stagnant would be the worst thing ever.
So you're not going to turn yourself into a Stieg Larsson or a Mankell or...
No, I mean, I obviously hugely admire both of them, but I don't know. You should never say never. You can have this conversation in 5 years' time. Maybe I will have changed my mind.
Please, will you come back in 5 years' time? We'll definitely have that conversation.
For sure.
What are you working on now? What can you tell us about what you're working on now, Jessica?
I have a very scattered approach right now. I had my fourth child a couple of years ago. And since then, I feel like my life has just been really turned upside down. And I am really having to work hard to find space and time to both read and write and think. So I'm kind of working on actually 2 or 3 different projects at the moment, all very different. And it seems to be, I think being in the situation that I'm in is I have to follow my passion. So it's the project that I'm most passionate about at the moment that is getting my attention at the moment.
Come on, give our audience some clues. What are you passionate about at the moment?
No, I am working on something that is also dark. I think darkness will always be in my novels, whether I try to avoid it or not. It's always going to be there. But it's kind of a little bit more humorous, I guess.
Oh, interesting.
And I'm also exploring writing from one perspective, which is quite challenging because I'm not used to that at all. You have to think of it quite differently in terms of moving the story forward.
You like to learn, don't you? You like challenges.
Yes, I do. I love it. Yeah.
So once you've learned something, do you move on to learn something else whilst applying the thing you've learned?
I guess so. I guess, you never really unlearn what you've learned unless it's something that doesn't serve you. Like you learn to cycle, you're never going to forget that. But yes, I do like to challenge myself. And I think that's why I keep moving around as well in the world, because I love to explore. And I think in my writing, it's very much like that. I need to keep myself challenged. It would be easy to just churn out a couple of more books in a similar sort of style that I've done these. And maybe career-wise, that would be the right move. But I'm not sure that my heart will be entirely in it. So that's why I'm kind of taking a bit of time exploring different things before the next one will be out.
I feel for you because that's an interesting dynamic as a writer to have to work with when you have some success. And of course, a publisher having helped create that success wants you to repeat the success by writing the same thing but different.
Yes, exactly. It's a challenge. But you also understand it from their perspective. A publisher, they're a business. So if I were in their shoes, I would think of it the same way. So it's just trying to find that balance, really.
Yeah.
And it's a great excuse that I've had another child. I have a lot on my plate. And it's okay for me to take a bit of time to work it all out.
Yes, it's called, lest we forget, it's called the publishing industry, not the publishing author support charity.
Exactly.
Let's end, Jessica, on this, if I may. I'm going to not hold your feet to the fire, but you have learnt well. You teach journalism and media. We have a lot of people paying attention to the Lockdown LitFest who are debut authors, who are writers wanting to get published. If we had to give a 2-question, 3-minute bullet point masterclass on what Jessica Jarlvi would teach anybody right now who wants to get published, who is trying to write, who is trying to find their way forward, trying to find their career as a writer, what are the 3 critical words of advice you would offer them?
Oh, only 3. Okay, I would say read as much as possible. Read as widely as possible. Don't just read one genre. Read different novels, different authors. I rarely reread a book because there's too many books out there. I need to read new authors all the time. So read as much as possible. And the other thing is, quite obviously, write as much as possible. because nothing is ever wasted. Even if you write a whole novel and you stick it in a drawer, you have learned so much from that. So write as much as possible and seek out feedback. Because that was what worried me initially, was actually showing my work to others. I was worried people were going to think, oh, this is not very good, is it? But actually, when I did my master's and I properly had to exchange work with other people, it was just life-changing. So don't be afraid of that.
I could ask a writer question. Seek feedback from whom? Because friends and family don't count.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yes, exactly. So don't write an agent said that my family loves it. No, no, obviously, no. You have to find readers that you trust. That's why it's really great to enroll in courses, because you'll meet other people and you'll work out very quickly who understands me and my writing. And then you keep in touch with those people. So I obviously have a few friends that we will exchange pieces of writing. And also I've got a writing group where we meet once a month and we'll exchange a couple of chapters. And not everybody's going to write the same genre as you, but that's also fine, because at the end of the day, you want their experience and what they feel like they are missing from that piece, or what they really enjoyed about that piece. And at the end of the day, you got to take it with a pinch of salt. It's your story, and you stick with your guts. Always stick with your guts, but do seek out feedback.
Last question. To the politicians who hold the purse strings that allow libraries to exist around the world, what would you say to them? You mentioned about the library that was important in your childhood not being there anymore.
Yes, no, I mean, you have got to keep libraries alive. It is a lifeline for so many people. It's not just about being able to access free books, but it means also that anybody can access books. They're not reliant on people having to purchase books for them. But it also creates independence, that you can go into a library and you can select anything that you want and learn about anything that you desire. So it's hugely important. I actually read an interview with you where you talked about literature being very important in a peace process, which I really, really agree with, because it's if we understand each other, and literature is a great way of understanding other people, I think it would just be the world would be a more peaceful place.
We can but hope. And
yes.
Finally, you're well on the path of a fantastic career. What would huge success, what would good look like, Jessica? What would big success mean to you?
Well, I guess it would be one of my books being made into a movie or a TV series. It would be fabulous to see it on the screen. But also being able to write in different genres, I guess, going forward.
You know,
will be stimulating and exciting.
You know, your publisher will be tearing their hair out saying, just stick to the one genre. Don't confuse the audience. And why is the film so important? Surely the book's the most important thing, because the film becomes the director's interpretation of the story.
I agree, but I think that it's just, I would just love to see how somebody else would translate it into a script. You know, the pieces that you pick out, it would be really interesting from that point of view.
I think that's very generous. I think that's very generous to create something and then wish somebody else would interpret it in their own way.
Yeah, but I wouldn't want to be one of those that, you know, the authors on set who is constantly going to butt in and have opinions about everything. I think it'll be quite interesting. I feel like my work is done and now somebody else can take it over.
Well, who knows? There may be film producers watching this that are thinking, what, Jessica Jarlvi? These sound like fantastic books.
Let's hope so.
Let's hope so. Jessica, it's been such a pleasure to have you here at the Lockdown LitFest. Thank you so much for joining us. Many congratulations on When I Wake Up and What Did I Do. If anybody's got some spare reading time this weekend, they're fantastic back-to-back works. They might keep you up a little bit at night, but they're just books. You can close them and shut them down. Jessica, thank you very much for joining us here at the Lockdown LitFest.
Thank you very much for having me. Can I just add one thing, actually?
Please.
Paul? I have to tell you that I listened to you interview Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie a few years ago, and it was before I was published. And I've seen you interview many authors, but that particular interview, I sat in the audience, I was not yet published, and she said that, Paul, when you interviewed me the first time, it was the first time somebody made me feel like a real author. I don't know if you remember that, but it really, really stuck with me and kind of really motivated me, actually. So the fact that you now just interviewed me, it's such a pleasure.
Well, the honor is mine. And I have to say, I'm delighted that you remember the Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie interview, because I was thrilled to interview her. It was for her debut novel. She just won the Caine Prize for African Writing, and it was one of her first big interviews. And bless Chimamanda, she's stayed in touch ever since, and hopefully we'll be able to get her onto this festival. I'm very touched by your words. Thank you, Jessica, very much indeed.
You. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. Jessica Jarlvi, born in Sweden, living in Dubai, writes in English. 2 fantastic novels, When I Wake Up and What Did I Do? Give yourselves a treat. Go away and buy them. We'll have a buy the button link below this and have a really good read, because there is some more exciting stuff to come from this fantastic author soon. And if you don't trust me, trust Sophie Hannah, who I said at the top, says Jessica Jarlvi is a hugely talented writer and definitely one to watch. Thank you very much for joining us. Keep safe, keep well. Sign up to us on YouTube. Please hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel. And please also do sign up for our newsletter. It's free, it's simple, and it'll keep you in touch with what we're doing. And as ever, look after yourselves. Thank you for joining. Cheerio.